Okay, I wanted to tell you about a book I read, and that book is Deliberate Evil by Edward J. Renahan. And basically, I think that today can count as the official start of spooky season, just because this is my last Friday of not working. Okay, but that being said, the reason that I wanted to read this book is because when I visited Salem, we went by this home quite a few times actually. That was apparently the house that the game Clue was based on. So the second floor of this mansion matches up with the second floor in the Clue game, which apparently Parker Brothers bought from some English dude and then changed it or something, but then apparently the English version and the US version were released at the same time. I don't know, Heather did some deep digging on that, but regardless, even cooler or extra crazy about this house is that there was actually a murder on it. So that is what the book is all about. It is about the murder of Captain White. The first thing that the book does a really good job of addressing is basically talking about why no one knows about this story. Apparently, Captain White was murdered. It was all over the news, and then it was just like squashed, and nobody heard about it for a long time, and it basically was unmapped for some 190 years, and that is because of all the famous, influential, rich people that were involved in this. The people that were involved in this story, like most directly, were some of the most influential people in Salem at the time, and their ancestors are still super influential and super rich. And basically the home today is owned by the Peabody Essex Museum, and some family members were basically benefactors or whatever, donated loads of money to the museum, and thus if the museum held the home and a whole bunch of papers related to this murder, well, they just kept it quiet. The other thing that the author does an amazing job of is just kind of setting the scene for how this story is going to unfold. So not just the setting, that it was a bright full moon in Salem, Massachusetts on the evening of Tuesday, April 6th, 1830, but also going deeper to describe like background on Salem, that it was a huge like shipping area, and people would basically get things from all over the world and bring them back to Salem. There were over 50 wharfs, and now there's only 3 or 4. I was there, but I counted 3 and I thought the book said 4. Anyway, that was kind of the status symbol for the city, was all these wharfs and all the amazing riches that came into the city through that. However, over the years and getting closer to this time of this murder, they kind of started to lose their status, because what was happening is the ships were getting bigger, and thus they couldn't be in the shallow waters that are by Salem. And yeah, it just was not the best situation. There are other cities, New York City and others, that just had better places for the bigger ships. So they were starting to lose money. Now, another thing I thought was super interesting was just how much Salem was involved in the trading of people, the sale of people. They were very, very into the slave trade, which we don't think about because we think of the South being the one that mostly enslaved other people and made money on other people. But in fact, Salem was heavily involved in this as well. And what happened is that because so many slaves were in the South, so many enslaved people, I apologize, were in the South, and they made children, that decreased their value, and thus people in Salem were not making as much money because the value of a human being was down. One of the passages in this book that I think is very well worded and interesting talks about the juxtaposition of these wealthy people that are doing super shady things. They're enslaving people, they are selling people, they are acting as pirates or hiring pirates to steal things from ships. and they're living these rich, amazing, wonderful lives, and that is juxtaposed by these people that were working like long, hard hours on the wharfs, getting stuff off of ships and all that sort of thing. And they're just living side by side together, but they're living drastically different lives. Now, this guy who was murdered, this Captain White, we learn a little bit about his background. And basically that's that his dad died when he was very, very little. He was only 3 at the time. And so his mom had 3 young kids, 5, 3, which was him, and a newborn. I believe he was brought into the family business and just kind of raised in a really affluent situation, but still to lose your dad at such a young age is really horrible. But what's more is he turned out to be a horrible human being. So not only was he in the sale of humans, but he also was like one of the worst people in charge of the ship that the enslaved people went across the ocean in, and he would actively encourage people to basically have fun with the women if they were interested in it. He himself partook in that fun and never felt guilty about it at all, even after other people started feeling guilty about that sort of thing. I believe he also was indirectly involved in pirating. I think he hired people to do that sort of work. He was just like not the best guy. In addition, and this is kind of what kind of starts this whole murder thing, he raised a few people in his home over the years, people that had become orphaned for various reasons or whatever, and one of those was his niece. He got very, very close to his niece, and when she had a child, I think that child was also in the home. Now, when that child grew, she obviously wanted to marry. She married this really shady guy who Captain White did not approve of, and so instead of just saying what he had to say and then keeping his mouth shut after that, or just keeping it shut altogether, he disinherited her from his will. And that is kind of how this whole murder starts. The murder starts off basically by somebody discovering that a window was open, and that window was never left open. They kind of fear that someone broke into the home, and it turns out they find this Captain White fellow dead in his bed. They do describe that. There's actually a couple autopsies, and they find out that he was murdered by 2 people, and they're basically trying to figure out what happened. So I will just leave it as that at that for the mystery piece of this book. Overall, I really liked this book, but I think I mostly liked it because I could visualize so much in this book because I had just visited Salem and I had literally been in these places. There were a lot of pictures included, like photographs, and that was amazing as well to help people visualize it. But because I had just been there, just the descriptions themselves were beautiful enough. So I really liked this book for that reason. I also just love the whole like true story behind Clue sort of a thing. The one thing I didn't really like about this book is there are so many people that are involved in this mystery, and kind of like my students, I don't want people to tell me stuff about them before I know them, because it's not going to click until I have met a person and then you tell me a story about that person. I'm not going to remember what you said. I'm going to not be able to connect it to this person. And I just felt like we were given a lot of information in the beginning, and then we didn't find out why those people were important until later on. And I would have cared and remembered more about said people if I knew why they were important. And so I just felt like that was a little bit confusing. Like, why am I hearing about Joe? There wasn't a Joe. Why am I hearing about Joe, who is Joe? Why is he important? We didn't find that out until later, and so it was kind of just a lot to have to hold in your mind. But overall, if you're interested in the true story behind the Clue board game, or if you're interested in a murder and a trial and the autopsy and the whole crime scene investigation back in the day, you might find this interesting. Let me know what you guys are reading and if you have any shorty recs for spooky season.